Welcome everybody to our session today of Great Women, and we are absolutely thrilled to welcome one of our great young women, Eliza Chalmers, who Eliza and her family have been long-time members of the Great Synagogue, and we're just so thrilled that she's going to talk to us about her career and her work. Just a little bit of an intro to Eliza. She has a Bachelor of Science from Macquarie University, where she majored in human biology and minored in biomolecular sciences and biology, so you can see where her interests are. And she has a master's degree from the University of Sydney, and her subjects included research methods and public health and medical nutrition and food service and nutrition assessment methods. And she achieved a high distinction for her research. Eliza now is working at the Garvan Institute doing clinical research into type 2 diabetes. And this is what she is going to talk to us about today. Eliza, perhaps we can start with a question. How did you get interested in dietetics and become a dietitian?
Well, I've always been interested in science, and I've also always been interested in food. And together they combined quite well into a career trajectory to become a dietitian. I started off after high school. I did a bachelor, as you said, I did a Bachelor of Science with thinking about a Master's of Dietetics in mind, though I did topple with the idea of medicine at one stage during my degree. I decided to stick with dietetics, as I decided that frankly, I didn't want someone's life in my hands. So I could just handle the food and somebody else could do the CPR. And yeah, so then after my undergraduate degree, I did a master's at Sydney Uni, and I then got a job at the Garvan Institute in medical research, but I work in a clinical research setting. So rather than doing research in rats in a lab, we do research in people. And we're one of the few groups in the Institute that does research in humans.
Okay, well, if you'd like to go on and show your screen and tell us about the research and how it works.
I'm doing research in personalized diets to treat diabetes. So as a dietitian, we're all about food. People always think that dietitians don't eat, but really we become dietitians because we love food. Here's a little slide about that. It's called the veterinarian diet. And a little joke that Rabbi Elton once told me. Two men are standing playing golf together, and one man comes up to his friend and says, "You know, I've decided to go on a new diet. I'm cutting out cake, sugar and fat and alcohol, so no cake, no biscuits, no cheese, no butter, no beer or wine or scotch." And his friend said to him, "Oh, do you think you're going to live longer?" And he said, "No, but it will feel that way."
Lovely. Lovely.
So a bit of background on food and nutrition. Nutrients are broadly categorized in two ways. We have our macronutrients and our micronutrients. So macronutrients are things that we eat in large quantities. These are things like carbohydrates, protein, fat, and water. We also have micronutrients, which are things that we eat in smaller quantities. So we've got our vitamins, and just a few examples of vitamin A and vitamin B, vitamin C and D and E and K. I don't know why they decided to skip F, G, H. And we also have our minerals, which just a couple of examples, things like calcium and iron and selenium. Some of these you may have heard of before. As in 2013, this thing called the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating came out. And it replaced the food pyramid that a lot of people grew up with. And it explains roughly how much of each food group is recommended. It was based on a very, very large literature review where all of the scientific evidence on all of these topics was read and analyzed. It formed about a 300-page document. And that then all went together to form this nice graphic and a few other more consumer-based things. So I'll just go through it with you. It's replaced the food pyramid, and it's more like a plate model or a pie chart. And each section is a food group and shows roughly how much of that you should eat per day. So our first food group is whole grain. Now, whole grains are good because they have some carbohydrates in them, which is our body's main energy source. And they're also very high in fiber, which is very important for your bowel health. It has B group vitamins, magnesium, copper, and zinc in them. And they include things like brown rice and oats, wholemeal bread or pumpernickel bread for those of us from a German background, corn, polenta, wheat flakes, and wholemeal pasta. Next, we have our proteins. Specifically, they advise us to eat lean protein. These are very important building blocks for our bones, our muscles, our cartilage, skin, and blood. And it helps maintain our muscle mass, which is particularly important when aging. They also help us burn more energy. If you have more muscle mass, you tend to burn more energy when you're resting. So that can help with weight management. It's also very important in repairing cells and building new ones, and our immune function. And we're all very interested in looking after our immune system in these coronavirus days. These include things like fish, chicken, lamb, eggs, and for those vegetarians out there, beans and lentils, chickpeas, tofu, and nuts. Then we have vegetables. Vegetables are naturally low in fat and low in energy, but they provide very important micronutrients, high in fiber. So the cucumber and tomato, even though they are technically fruit, according to biologists, as dietitians we call them vegetables, and cabbage, spinach, mushrooms, capsicum, eggplant, zucchini, celery, mushrooms, squash are all other examples of healthy vegetables. And then, of course, we have our fruit, which is also high in fiber, high in antioxidants, and high in micronutrients. And they're things like the apple and pear, the melon and pineapple, berries, kiwi, grape, mangoes, all those lovely fruits. And finally, we have dairy as our fifth food group. Dairy is very important for our bone health, especially as we age, and when we're young as well. And it provides calcium, magnesium, and potassium, which all is important for bones. And it's a good idea. They recommend that we focus on low-fat dairy options. So these include foods like milk and cheese and yogurt, milk powder, and soy milk. But just a piece of advice, it's important to try to buy fortified soy milk, which has additional calcium added in. And it's generally the organic, just a side note, it's generally the organic brands of soy milk and almond milk and all of those milks that don't have calcium added in. And it's good to try to get the ones with calcium, unless if you have a different medical condition that you can't. And finally, we have what we call discretionary food or junk food. And these we recommend to eat in small amounts and only eat them occasionally. Things like soft drinks, even diet soft drinks, alcohol, ice cream, chips, sweets, cakes, even things like sausages and wurst and things are also, and processed meat is also considered to be a discretionary food. So it's not something you should try not to base your diet around these foods. Now, the next thing I'm going to mention is the glycemic index, which some of you may have heard of before. You may have heard about low GI food. The glycemic index is a measure of the speed in which glucose enters the bloodstream. So when you eat foods with carbohydrates, they get broken down into glucose. And so some foods in this graph, some foods enter the bloodstream very quickly, and some foods take a bit longer and enter the bloodstream nice and slowly. And they say that it's that high GI foods you should try to avoid eating and try to focus on more low GI options. So they test this out by getting volunteers, and the volunteer eats the same grams of carbohydrates in different foods. So, and then they come in fasting, so they come in first thing in the morning, and they test their blood sugars every 15 minutes using a finger poke. And then you can plot how the blood sugars are affected. And you average out these volunteers and it creates the GI scale, and it can be used to compare different foods to each other. So they use about 10 volunteers in the GI studies. So these are going to seem like seemingly separate topics, but they'll all come together in a few minutes. So we also have our gut microbiome, which is the bacteria that's naturally living in our gut. Now, some people may have heard of this before, and some of you might think, oh my goodness, I have bacteria living in my gut, that's gross. Well, really, they have quite an important effect on our health, and we have trillions of microorganisms living in our guts all the time. And we have 10 times more microbial cells than cells in the human body. So really we're being invaded by bacteria and other forms of microorganisms. We know that having a higher diversity of your microbiome is associated with a lower risk of many different diseases. And these can also play and have an impact in blood sugar regulation. How do you look after your microbiome? You may have heard before about probiotics and prebiotics. So probiotics are fermented foods, things like sauerkraut and pickles and olives, yogurt, kimchi. And prebiotics is just a fancy way of saying fiber. So all of the fruits and vegetables and whole grains and nuts and seeds, they're all very good for the microbiome. And as always, as with most things, it's much better to try to eat these foods than to take them in a supplement. They're much better absorbed, and sometimes the supplements just pass right through you, where the foods, where eating them in food form tends to have a much better effect at keeping your gut health. So my research is in type 2 diabetes. And I'll just quickly explain how diabetes works. So type 2 diabetes is caused by insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is a combination of a genetic predisposition plus environmental factors, and it's often associated with obesity. Insulin is the key that unlocks our cells and allows glucose to enter in. And glucose is needed in our cells in order to have all sorts of very, very important cellular functions. It's the building block of our cells, the main energy form. And if sometimes our cells don't respond well to the insulin that's being produced, it's a bit like people who live over a flight path, and they just get, or people who live on Old South Head Road, and they get used to the sound of the cars or the airplanes all day, and it takes something quite a bit louder to actually wake them up at night. That's what happens sometimes in our bodies. Our bodies stop responding well to the insulin that's produced. So then our pancreas over here just increases its insulin production. But eventually the pancreas gets a bit tired, and it doesn't produce quite enough insulin, which means that there's a bit more blood sugar, a bit more glucose in the blood than we would like. And this is what we call diabetes. And that can lead to many different side effects later on. So it's good to try to prevent it from occurring. And prediabetes is the step before diabetes. And we're trying to prevent prediabetes from progressing into diabetes and to prevent diabetes from getting worse and progressing further. So a major diabetes prevention study happened in the mid-90s till early 2000s. It was a 5-year study. They recruited thousands of people, and they looked at how we can prevent prediabetes from progressing into diabetes. Their main marker was something called HbA1c, which is called glycosylated hemoglobin. So glycosylated hemoglobin is a measure, an approximate measure of your 3-month blood sugars, how your blood sugars have gone over the last 3 months. So it's about the number of glucose in your how much glucose is in your hemoglobin, just to be technical. So it's a quick blood test, and it measures roughly how you're going for the last 3 months, how your blood sugars have been. So this study had 3 different groups. The first group was a placebo arm. So they were given no intervention at all. And over the 5 years, their blood sugars continued to rise. And they progressed to diabetes. Then they had a metformin arm, which is a very, very common medicine that's derived from a plant. And it's a very common diabetes medicine. And it's now used a lot in prediabetes as well to try to stop the progression. And then they also had a lifestyle arm where the participants were given an intensive lifestyle intervention with a dietitian and exercise. And the results were quite interesting. So the lifestyle arm had the largest drop in blood sugars, and then it slowly started to creep back up. And the metformin arm also had quite a big drop at the beginning, but then started to creep back up again, while the placebo arm just continued to creep up. Now, something that was a shame about this study from a dietitian's perspective is that they never did an arm that was lifestyle plus metformin. But that's been studied extensively since, and we know that that seems to be the best treatment for prediabetes. So at 3 years, 28% of people in the placebo arm, in the no treatment arm, had progressed to diabetes, while 21% who were taking the medicine and 14% of people who were in the lifestyle arm. Interestingly, by 5 years, by the end of the study, these two, the metformin and lifestyle arm, had synced, but the lifestyle arm had still had a much slower rise and less people progressing. So now that I've explained all of this, you might be wondering, Eliza, that's all good, but what should I actually eat? So that's the interesting thing. What should an individual eat compared to what evidence we give the general population? And that's where a dietitian really does come into play, to give a diet that's specific to you and your lifestyle and the foods that you like and how many times a day suits you to eat and what really works for your body and your issue. What food is right for you? That's what our study is looking at. So we collaborate with the Vitamin Institute in Israel. And our collaborators repeated the glycemic index studies. Rather than doing them in 10 people, they repeated them in 1,000 people. Because 10 people is a bit of a smaller sample size. So we have 2 sub-example participants here. They were given the exact same food. Sorry, before I go into this, I should say that when they repeated the study in 1,000 people, the average glycemic index was the exact same as the GI studies. So that's fantastic. That means that we actually don't need such a large sample size in order to calculate the glycemic index of what we eat. We can do it with 10 people. It's fine. But our collaborators, they looked at the individual's blood sugars, and they saw a huge amount of variation in people who ate the exact same food, but had completely different blood sugars. So people would eat the same thing, and some of them would hardly spike at all. Their blood sugars would hardly move, like they didn't eat. And some of them would spike very high, like they ate a very, very sweet, sugary, high GI food. And they were eating the same thing. So here's an example. This is participant 75. And when he ate banana, his blood sugars remained quite stable. When participant 24, when he ate banana, his blood sugars spiked quite high and then had quite a quickly fall down. On the other hand, participant 24, when they ate, 75, when they ate cookies, they also had quite a big spike and then their thing came down. This curve, just by the way, is what we expect to see if you've ever done an oral glucose tolerance test where you get given that very, very sweet drink. This type of a curve is what we often see in people with diabetes where they drink that drink. And here's participant 24. Their blood sugars stayed very stable when they ate cookies. Now, if you're anything like me, you'd want your blood sugars to be like person 24, where cookies don't make your blood sugars spike, but bananas do. But we don't know what each individual is. So they looked at this data and they wanted to know why. They were, like all good scientists, we're not satisfied with something like this. We want to know why. And they found that there was a huge amount of factors beyond the food that we're eating that determines how an individual will respond to blood sugars. And one of these things is the gut microbiome. Also some measures in your blood tests, very, very detailed questionnaires, anthropometrics, which means your body composition, your weight compared to your height, and also a food diary. And the food diary is compared with a glucose monitoring that we put on, a continuous glucose monitor, which measures your blood sugars every 15 minutes for 2 weeks. And we compare it with the food diary to see what you ate over that period. All of these come together in an algorithm to design a personalized diet for you to lower your glycemic responses, to lower how much your blood sugars spike after you eat. And these are used to predict personal glycemic responses rather than give an average data for the average population. So my team did a very small study in this. My supervisor gave a talk to the public and a few people had volunteered to be guinea pigs for us as an early study. So this person, we have a husband and wife and another man, and they were all of a similar age. They were all healthy people, fit, lean, but the results were quite interesting. So for this woman, ice cream did not make her blood sugars spike. Where basmati rice and persimmon, which is fruit, and basmati rice is typically thought to be low GI, did make her blood sugars spike. So that's interesting. These are two things. Basmati rice is normally what a dietitian would recommend people. Then something very interesting is these two men, they both ate tuna sushi. One of them had a big blood sugar spike, and one of their blood sugars hardly spiked at all. So we found that extremely interesting. So in our study, everybody gets given a smartphone application, and they use the application to tell them what to eat. So it has recommended foods on it. And also they can put in their own combinations of foods and see what it rates them and see whether it's considered good or not for their blood sugars. So these are two screenshots from the same person. She's a middle-aged woman and these are two seemingly healthy breakfasts. She has homemade bread with hummus and a mandarin, or yogurt with strawberries and homemade muesli. She and her husband enjoy cooking. They make a lot of healthy homemade things. It's interesting to note, these two things, they have very similar energy, and quite similar carbohydrates, fat, and protein between them. However, this one has given her a score of excellent, meaning that we predict that it won't cause large spikes in her blood sugars. And this one is given a score of bad, meaning that we are predicting that it will cause large spikes in her blood sugars. Here's another example. These are two different participants where I put in the exact same meal into the app. This is a T-bone steak with a salad with salad dressing and onion, brown rice and sweet corn. And this person who is a man was rated good. And this lady, we predict that it will be very bad for her blood sugars, meaning that this will cause her a big blood sugar spike. So the app becomes the treatment, and the app gives you feedback on what you're eating. And I, as a dietitian, teach you some ways to try to modify your meal to see if it will change your score. So our study has two different arms. Everybody's given the very common diabetes medicine that's derived from a plant called metformin. And half of them are given a standard healthy diet that's similar to what the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating recommends. And half of them are given a personalized diet, which is the personalized diet for your blood sugar, for your gut microbiome. Both diets are personalized because all dietitians personalize the diet to the foods that to how it works for your lifestyle and what you enjoy eating. Everybody goes through a 2-week profiling period first, and then they do 6 months on either diet. Then at the end of the 6 months, we repeat all of their measures, and then we wait another 6 months and we do another quick survey and another blood test to see how they're going, just to check up on how they've done after no treatment for another 6 months. So we take a huge amount of measures, including DEXA scans that measures what type of fat you have and where it's located, questionnaires, continuous glucose monitors, continuous activity monitors, which are like a very, very fancy Fitbit. And we take things about your microbiome and some other blood tests. And we repeat them all at the end. So unfortunately, I can't share too much data with you because we haven't completed the study. It's too early to analyze between the two groups. But we did have a significant, this is across both arms, we've had a significant drop in blood sugars from an average of 5.7% of HbA1c to 5.5. So people on average have reversed their prediabetes, going from the prediabetes to the normal healthy range for your HbA1c. Similarly, all of our participants, most of them have lost weight. And on average, their BMI is a measure of your weight compared to your height. And on average, they have gone from the obese range to the overweight range, which in real numbers terms, that's an average weight loss of 5.4 kilos in the first 6 months. And people have been maintaining, if not losing more weight, continuously after the 6 months. So this is the team that I work within. We have 3 people from the Weizmann Institute that we collaborate with. We have a few more that look at our microbiome data. And we have other people who are in Australia, in Sydney, at the Garvan Institute. And just a little plug, our recruitment is still open. If this study sounds interesting to you or anybody that you know, you please contact us. You can email us at predict@garvan.org.au, or you can call me on 9295 8233. We're looking for people aged 20 to 70 with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes that aren't yet taking sugar-lowering medicine, or if they've had a history of a strong family history of diabetes or gestational diabetes or something along those lines. Thank you.
Eliza, what is the definition of prediabetes?
So it's a range between what we consider to be a healthy blood sugar and a raised blood sugar, but it's not quite considered pre-diabetes yet. So it's this gray area in the middle.
Did you have a number on that?
Yeah. So it's an HbA1c of over 5.7.
5.7. Okay. And I have another question for you. Could you go back to your slides? And
yes,
is that possible? And then go back to the one where you had the diets on the app towards the end. Go back. Yeah. That one and the one after.
yes.
So how do you predict that the same diet is going to be good or bad in a different person?
It's based on the huge amount of factors that we put into the algorithm, and that's where the team in Israel comes in. So it's the gut microbiome, it's the surveys, and it's also during the 2 weeks where we profile you and you use the app for every meal, keeping a food diary, we match that up with a continuous glucose monitor that we put on the back of your arm, which measures your blood sugars every 15 minutes. And quite a few other factors as well goes into determining this type of data.
So you know absolutely every single thing that possible about the patient.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And for the gut microbiome, is that done on a stool sample analysis?
Yes. We take a stool sample. We actually look at the DNA of the bacteria in the sample, and that's done in Israel. So we send them off to Israel to be analyzed.
Wow. Oh, well, I have to tell you, this has been absolutely fascinating. I've been enthralled. You're a wonderful speaker, and your slides were fantastic. And I mean, I have a medical background, and even so, I've learned so much from you. I've had a couple of comments in the chat box. Sylvia Lenny, who's a good friend of mine, and she's also a doctor, and she said, excellent presentation, very clearly presented, thank you. And see, that was an excellent presentation, thanks Eliza. I have been diagnosed with diabetes too, and learning what I can and can't eat. I will think about joining your study. I've just volunteered for another one. Does anybody else have any questions?
Can you talk a little bit about plant-based diets?
Yes. Well, I think the thing is it works for some people and it doesn't work for others. Some people, I mean, firstly, I should say that having more plants in your diet is good for everyone. We know the average Australian is not eating enough lean meat, vegetables, fruit, and whole grains. Sorry, they're eating too much meat and they're not eating enough vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. So increasing the amount of plants in your diet and I can only give general advice because I'm not taking a medical history from anyone, is beneficial in general. And then specifically cutting out all meat, it's something that you have to be very careful with because animal products provide a lot of micronutrients. So it takes very careful planning to make sure that you reach all of your requirements. And it works for some people and not for others.
Thank you.
Eliza, logistically, how do you collaborate with the Weizmann Institute? How does that work?
So I meet with the mathematician at the Vitamin every week over technology. It's often at funny hours. This time of year, it's not too bad, but in summertime, when it's winter in Israel, with the time changes, it tends to be at funny hours. And she runs the algorithm for us, and she also, they are in charge of sequencing our gut microbiome. So we post, well, not through regular post, we courier the samples over to them, and they sequence them for us. She also helps me with maintaining the app because I have no idea about software development. And it truly is a collaboration where they are contributing quite a bit to, and we couldn't run the study that we're doing without the team in Israel.
Thank you. And Eliza, just a very practical question. You know, we're all trying to watch what we eat, but you know, that comes that time of day where you really need a snack. You just need something to keep you going till dinner time or till lunchtime. What are some bits of advice you can give us for healthy snacking?
Well, first, I personally think that snacks can be very helpful because they can, as you said, keep your hunger at bay and stop you overeating at the next meal. We know that when your blood sugars start to drop, that's when you get that ravenous feeling, when you feel like you can get home. I don't know about you guys, but when I get too hungry, I could eat the entire fridge, including the fridge door. So a healthy snack can help prevent that from happening. So for me, in general, I recommend people to eat things like yogurt and nuts, or a wholemeal cracker with some cottage cheese or hummus, or some carrots and hummus or cottage cheese. And I think, and it really can help keep you going until your next meal. And stop.
I'm so glad you didn't say celery, because there's nothing that would turn me off more than if I needed a snack and someone gave me a piece of celery. No.
For other people, they love celery, but you need to, you know what, life's too short to eat food that you hate eating. You need to find ways to eat food that you enjoy that's still healthy. And Sharon, for you, I think you should avoid celery. I think celery is very bad for you.
That's lovely. Shelley Kensel has a question. Can you go ahead, Shelley?
You say if you want, have some nuts. Yes. Can you recommend which nuts? Because aren't there good nuts, they're bad nuts? I mean, I know they say almonds are good for you, but only, let's say about 10. I might even be going overboard. But what are the good and what are the bad nuts?
That's quite that's a hard question to answer without taking a bit more information from you, which I'm not going to do in this forum, because all nuts are good for certain people. But in general, walnuts and Brazil nuts and cashews are all things that are quite good, but you should try to choose the unsalted varieties. And about a handful, and all of us have different sized handfuls. So about a handful is a serve.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to ask a question.
Go ahead, Jill.
Thank you very much. I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to you. I'm intrigued. What proportion of people who are pre-diabetic go on to be full blast diabetes, or is there very little connection between the two?
So about a third of people with pre-diabetes will develop full diabetes. About a third will stay pre-diabetic for the rest of their life, and about a third will reverse.
Right, so it is possible to reverse.
Yes. With the right lifestyle intervention and sometimes metformin as well, it can be reversed and put into remission.
Right. That's interesting.
And for most people, losing weight helps with that.
And when you're giving dietary advice, you hadn't mentioned it, but in terms of it's what you eat, but also is there counting the calories? In other words, if you're eating crackers, you can't eat 27 crackers. So you're also advising on quantity as well as quality.
Portion size makes all the difference. I mean, most people can eat a small amount of chocolate, but it's about the portion. And for me, it's about truly enjoying the treat that you have and having your favorite treat. So for me, it's not chocolate cake. For me, it's apple cake. For somebody else, it's chocolate cake. And whatever you decide is your thing, have one that you truly, truly enjoy. For an example, I feel that there's no point of eating soggy hot chips. I don't enjoy soggy hot chips. They have the same amount of energy as crispy hot chips, but I don't enjoy eating them. So for me, it's not worth it.
Eliza, I have some messages for you here in the chat box.
Thank you.
Sue Salinger, thanks Eliza, extremely interesting, informative and well presented. Shabbat Shalom. From Dion Drexler, thank you Eliza for a very informative presentation. Lots to think about and implement. Shabbat Shalom. And then Anne C. writes, this is a question, can early diabetes be reversed with lifestyle change?
I don't like the term reversed. I prefer to think of it as being put in remission. And yes, in certain cases, it can be put in remission with intensive lifestyle change. Sometimes you need some medication as well, even if it's not forever. But yes, it sometimes can be put in remission with intensive lifestyle change.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
The other thing I'm intrigued is does diabetes run in families? Is that because in certain families they eat the wrong food, or is it just part of your metabolism?
It's actually both.
Right.
And something that I didn't. So there's a genetic predisposition. Something that I didn't get into is, it's quite complicated. It's called epigenetics, which is actually inherited things that turn on and off certain genes, and that is actually inherited. So you could have changes in the mother or the father that's then transmitted onto the child through the genetic code, and the child may be able to reverse some of those changes. So epigenetics is the turning on and off of genes. So for an example, the DNA in our eye is the exact same as the DNA in my hand, but my skin on my hand behaves differently to my eye. So that's epigenetics, and it also can turn on and off genes for diabetes and obesity and other inherited, even there's all sorts of very, very fascinating research in epigenetics with PTSD and all sorts of things that can be inherited. So in answer to your question, it's both, it's nature and nurture, and it's both of them separately and together at the same time.
Interesting.
And Eliza, your research, where do you see it going in the future?
So it'll be very interesting to see where this goes, because, well, firstly, right now we don't know what our results will be. It's too early to analyze our results between the two groups. It can create bias in the researchers. If you see, oh, something's starting to trend this way, then people get corrupt, certain people. So we try to avoid that. And it will be interesting to see where it goes, because this isn't advice that you can give to a whole population. But we do know that people need individualized, tailored advice anyhow. You know, it's not enough for the GP to just give a flyer that says this is what you should eat. People need more modification to make it work for them. It's not enough the Weight Watchers diet, which is just Weight Watchers book that, you know, from the 70s and 80s, that everybody was given the same stock standard diet. People need more modification to make it work for them. And it's important for it to be personalized. So it will be interesting to see where this research goes. I think that there'll be a lot more looking at individuals' requirements, individuals' microbiome, and seeing what foods are right for them in the future. So watch this space.
Well, this has been our space this morning with you, and it has been absolutely fantastic. You are so knowledgeable, you are so articulate. Everybody has enjoyed it. You can tell by the questions and the comments. You have really taught us a lot, Eliza, and we thank you so much. And we hope you'll be back with us in the future to give some more follow-ups.